Hello everyone, welcome back to the TJOmega channel for day 1167 of our daily content grind. So, earlier this month, we talked about Elita-1 and the rise that she has had, especially thanks to most recent media, starting to actually recognize her as like a prominent female transformer and remembering that she existed before RC. It's kind of a nice, refreshing change. It has been great to see, and I specifically did that video to kind of overlook the character and just like how far she's come, because there are some things about her we do need to discuss, including this Patreon request that frankly I've been sitting on for way too long, because every time I sit and think about it I go way too far in it. So we're going to keep things simple, because the whole concept is, what happens if Elita-1 had actually joined the Autobots on the Ark when they crashed on Earth? So, if we go back to the search for Alpha Trion, her debut episode, we are aware that they retconned the Autobots leaving Cybertron. Originally, there was no attack on Iacon, but in the new version, there was. In this episode, they actually depicted an attack on the shuttle before launch, which is what kept Elita-1 from joining Optimus Prime and the rest of the Autobots on board for the mission. Weird little retcon, makes absolutely no sense, but it does put that thought in your head. What happens if Elita-1 actually made it on board the Ark? What if she woke up 4 million years later, in 1984, along with the rest of the Autobots? This gives us some fun scenarios to play with, but it also changes quite a bit. Now, I'm not going to start writing individual stories and episodes for her. I'm not going to tell you that she's going to be like the star of this and that episode, and this is the plot line I would do, and etc., etc., etc. But we will kind of go over a little bit of what her role would be and specific episodes that I think would come into play the most, especially in regards to just how her character relates to everything else. Because ultimately, G1 is going to play out the way G1 always did, including a female character, including Elita-1, is not going to dramatically alter the course of Transformer history, but it is going to make a few scenarios possible, and they're fun to discuss and talk about. So, for starters, one thing that occurred to me, Elita-1 is, as we know from the search for Alpha Trion, is a high-ranking Autobot character. She is essentially the leader of what's left on of the Autobots on Cybertron. So if we apply that, then we actually have something to the Autobots that only the Decepticons demonstrated in G1, and that is a command structure. Keep this in mind. In the Decepticons, obviously Starscream is second in command, and he is referred to as such more than once. And then even beyond that, that Soundwave is Megatron's right-hand man, so there's your third. You have a hierarchy that is established. You don't really have that for the Autobots. Who is Optimus Prime's second in command? I mean, if you go by more than meets the eye, it's supposed to be Jazz, because he's the one that Optimus deferred orders to for the rest of the Autobots. But nothing really indicates that afterwards, because the Autobots and because the cartoon is so focused on like getting each character their moment in the sun in order to sell toys, they kind of bop around the Autobot cast without really singling anybody out as that's the second in command. If you're picking a number 2 Autobot, it's Bumblebee or maybe Grimlock, but I wouldn't call either of them second in command. One is a scout and one is a team leader. That's, a leadership role, but he still defers directly to Optimus, and he takes orders from others. He took orders from Wheeljack. Of course, that's his creator talking. So, Elita-1 being in the mix would actually kind of take that blurred line away. She would absolutely be second in command to the Autobots, And that puts her in a fun scenario, because while that does give the Autobots a command structure they lack in Generation 1, it also gives Starscream something he doesn't have, and that is a rival. I don't think Starscream has a proper rival amongst the Autobots until Windblade shows up 30 years after the fact. When the truth here is, like, you think about this. So Optimus and Megatron are rivals, obviously. Okay? Soundwave has Blaster. They are rivals. You have every Combiner team has a rival on the opposite side. The Dinobots are rivals to the Constructicons, etc., etc. You know, a lot of those characters work in those balances of this side has it, so this side has to have it too. Like, even if they never really, like, have direct correlation, you've got 3 Autobot triple changers, 3 Decepticon triple changers. That, again, comes with the toy line trying to balance things out. But when it comes to Starscream and, like, who's his equivalent on the Autobot side, because they have no second in command, there is no obvious choice. You know, he'll get into conflicts with certain characters, but it's usually brief. It's certainly not Bumblebee. You know, they really don't get into fights that often, really. In a perfect world, it'd be Prowl, so they could just send their repaints after each other. But if you have Elita-1 there, that would make her the counterpoint to Starscream. And that gives you a lot more scenarios, especially in Season 2. Think of how many episodes star just Starscream for the Decepticons. And Megatron is just back at base, taking a nap. I don't know what Megatron's doing. But Season 2 does feature a bunch of episodes where Starscream is the lead antagonist. You know, the screenshot you see here is from a Decepticon raider in King Arthur's court, where you have a collection of Decepticons, but only 2 Autobots to face them, Hoist and Warpath. And the episode would feel more balanced if they had a command character to match Starscream. That's where Elita-1 is. So while Optimus Prime is very much that leader who is willing to step in and actually be at the forefront, you know, and not endanger any of his men if he doesn't have to. He's willing to do anything he would order one of his troops to do, and is always there at the battlefield as a result. But like Megatron, he doesn't always have to go if he's got a second. So that's where you have Elita showing up and being the lead Autobot in some of these episodes, especially when Starscream is there to act as the counterpoint. So you have interesting roles that it adds to both. It would also kind of create that connection between her and Optimus. Now, Optimus is already kind of seen as a father figure type fictional character. I'm not saying he's domesticated. I'm not saying he's coming home to his wife after he beats up Megatron. But I definitely, keep in mind, we're just having fun here, right? It is still like an 80s franchise with a toy line aimed at boys, and we know they would never seriously feature Elita-1 in major roles or make her the star of episodes because it's just not going to sell to the boys. So we're definitely not going to have her as like the wife at home. At most, it would kind of be like how a lot of like the 80s, you know, like potential couples were in animation. You know, like your He-Man and Teela, or your Lady J and Flint for you G.I. Joe fans, where there's obviously a connection, there's obviously flirting, but they're not being overt about it because they don't want to like scare off the boys. It would just be like a background element. It'd be like that humoristic little stinger at the end of a video, you know, at the end of an episode. Things like that. So I don't think it would play a major part, but it would definitely be an element. There'd definitely be something to it. Now, for specifics, I look at episodes like Divide and Conquer. If Elita-1 is present for an episode like this, there are 2 scenarios that might play out. The first one is the battle outside of the Ark between Autobot and Decepticon armies, where having a solid leader at the forefront might have made them stand a better chance. Instead of the Autobots being completely beaten after, just before Optimus gets off the operating table to challenge Megatron, the fight might have still been going on. It might have been much more of a standoff between the two sides, which may not have been as dramatic as like the hero appearing to save the day, but it might have also made more sense for the episode, because all the Autobots are defeated except for Optimus Prime, and then like Wheeljack and Ratchet, who were still inside after repairing Prime. And the Decepticons were all still on their feet. So really, Megatron should have won, but then they adhered to this like ancient Cybertronian battle code that no one brought up before. If Elita's there, the sides are a lot more even. The fight is still going on when Optimus comes back, and you might have had something that might not have been as dramatic, but certainly more logical. But speaking of logic, there's the other side to this, and that's the Shockwave side of this. Keep in mind, if Elita-1 left on the Ark, she's not there for 4 million years to be a thorn in Shockwave's side. If there's anything that has kept Shockwave from making any kind of progress in recovering Megatron or trying to rejuvenate Cybertron on his own, it's because the female Autobots, or anyone under Elita's command, it's because they have been basically stripping him of his resources in order to do those things. If he himself and his base is low on power, it's not just because Cybertron's depleted, it's because whatever he has is being leached by Elita-1 and her team. But if they're not there to be a thorn in your side, so without Elita-1 there, the female Autobots may very well be led by Alpha Trion directly, and who knows at that point how this would have turned out. Probably far less rebellious, if anything. It might have been in a holding pattern until Optimus Prime returned. Either way, you run a risk of Cybertron not being nearly as hospitable when the Autobots went to get the part to repair Optimus Prime in Divide and Conquer. So you're left with the potential of them not returning with the part to repair Optimus at all. You might have seen a death of Optimus Prime in Season 1 simply because Shockwave is far more capable and has far more resources at his disposal to stop any Autobots trying to breach the planet. So that episode could have gone two very drastically different ways, just depending on what exactly is going on. I guess 3. If the Autobots fail to return from Cybertron and Elita-1 actually stands up to Megatron, you might have had a very different show on your hands. But speaking of this, we have other episodes this would affect, like for instance, the key to Vector Sigma. This is again an episode that relies on the Autobots actually getting to Cybertron and finding it actually hospitable enough to actually get done what they need to get done. In this case, to create the aerial bots. Now, without them, they lose the episode. The Decepticons win with the key to Vector Sigma. If you don't have the female Autobots there, does that actually play out? Does Shockwave have the resources to stop the Autobots from reaching Vector Sigma if the female Autobots weren't leeching him and scavenging from him for literally millions of years? Don't know. But it's an interesting situation to play out. And any episode that does require the Autobots to return to Cybertron for whatever reason, it is very likely that the planet would be far more hostile once they were there. It would be far bigger of a challenge to accomplish whatever they need to do back on Cybertron. Simply having Elita-1 off planet could drastically change how things are going. If they don't have the gung-ho leader that she is, do the female Autobots really keep Shockwave at bay for as long as they did? Fun little scenarios like that. And I could go through the entirety of the first 2 seasons in order to really figure out exactly how Elita-1's presence would drastically affect things, both with her being on Earth and her not being on Cybertron. That said, there's really only one scenario here that really, really matters here, and that's the Battle of Autobots City. Now, if she is at the lead of the fight. Now, we know Ultra Magnus is not slouching in his role as city commander, but we also know he views himself as a soldier. He doesn't really view himself as a leader. So would Elita-1 being there actually make a huge difference or not? Now, ultimately, probably not. It would probably still fall the same way, though I do think the Decepticons would have had a much harder time taking the city if you had a more capable leader at the helm of the Autobots. So maybe, yeah, maybe a few characters survive. Wheeljack. Maybe a few actually do make it out that didn't make it out in the movie. We don't know. That's the fun of a what if. But ultimately, I don't think it plays out that much different. Maybe she was more likely to interfere in the battle between Optimus and Megatron. Because, now she has a boyfriend to protect. So she has a much bigger stake in it than Hot Rod does. But ultimately, yeah, I think the battle plays out the same. It's the aftermath that is far more interesting to me. Does Magnus ever get the Matrix? Or is Elita-1 further ahead in the food chain? We only get a hierarchy of Autobots, like a command structure, in Season 3, starting with the movie. Ultra Magnus is very clearly second in command to Rodimus Prime in Season 3. And then you might make an argument for Cup being like second, like being third in command. So it's much easier to see in that season. Elena's presence would alter that dramatically. If she, to keep her as this high-ranking commander character, she would absolutely still be like number 2 when Optimus Prime died. So would she be the one to inherit the Matrix? Especially as she does have leadership capability that Ultra Magnus, by his own admission, doesn't have. And keep in mind, she's rebuilt by Alpha Trion the exact same way as Optimus Prime was, so I feel like she would be just as compatible with the Matrix as he ended up being. Even if Trion did sneak it into him first, it's possible. It's highly likely. Now, while that does present a fun scenario, and yeah, like there is a chance that things play out differently with Elita-1 rather than Ultra Magnus because their strategies would be different. Eventually the Matrix does fall to Rodimus Prime. I'm not going to say like, ultimately her role in the movie would probably be similar to Magnus. And I'm not going to say like, oh, well, Unicron would have just eaten the planet Cybertron because Elita, is designed for the Matrix and, naturally it would have never gotten to Hot Rod's hands. I'm not going that far. I'm not going that far as different. But it does mean that she would be a Matrix bearer. I do think that she would have been in line ahead of Ultra Magnus to inherit that artifact. And that makes Season 3 more interesting. With the death of Optimus Prime and her own failure to actually carry the Matrix against Galvatron and ultimately Unicron, I feel like this is where she would fade back. The same way a lot of the Season 1 and 2 characters faded back for the Season 3 cast, I feel like Elita-1 would do the exact same thing, maybe giving a torch to RC to carry on in her stead. And that wouldn't be good to actually like bridge the two characters together or even flesh out RC. Maybe she was part of the female Autobots and we just never saw her, the same way Ultra Magnus was, like a worthy Autobot leader, even though we didn't see him until the movie. It could have played out in a similar way, but really, like, come Season 3, your story with Elita-1 is that of like a leader who has to face loss and failure. She lost the Autobot she was in love with. She failed to carry the Matrix, and lost it to Galvatron. Individually, these, like losing Prime weighs heavily on Hot Rod throughout that movie and throughout Season 3. Losing the Matrix does weigh on Ultra Magnus for the rest of the movie. Here you'd have a character who would have to face both at once. And that would make for a very sad, admittedly, but it would make for an interesting character shift. And it would make for a good story. Especially if you want to elevate RC and have her be like the new, female Autobot in command. Like, no Matrix passing, but here, this is yours now. I can't, you can clearly pick up where I left off. That kind of thing. And then you establish RC a lot better. So that's a nutshell thing. As I said, there's so many episodes I could pick through and go, this is what Elita would be doing if she was on Earth. If she had joined the Autobots when they left on the Ark, this is what they would be doing. But there's your general roundup. There's definitely interesting aspects, and admittedly, some things I think would play out the same, but ultimately, Elita would be an interesting addition, because she would add a wrinkle to the Autobots that they otherwise lack, and even to the Decepticons. I would have loved to have a few decades of stories about how Elita-1 exists just to annoy Starscream. That would be fun for me. But that's just my ideas. Those are just me being creative for the day. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this little bit of a 20-minute fanfic. I do appreciate it. And as always, I will see you next time.